everyone for joining us and ask you to once again, for those of you that are just joining us, um, feel free to put your name and pronouns and where you're joining us from in the chat so that we can all see where you're joining us from. And welcome. I'm Vernon Wall, he, him pronouns. I'm currently the Director of Business Development for LeaderShape. Happy to be here with you. I'm going to ask my wonderful colleague, Abby, to introduce herself because she's going to be joining us also too. So say hey, Abby.
Hi friends, Abby Prince. I'm the Director of Program Quality and Management at LeaderShape, and I'm glad to see you all here today.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone. We're excited to be back again for this 5th series of virtual conversations that we're providing for leadership educators. We've had over 1,500 people registered to engage in our first 4 series, and we're excited to be back for round 5. The purpose of our time together is to share questions, thoughts, best practices as we continue to reimagine how we deliver engaging leadership programs to our students through virtual platforms. I do want to begin by sharing with you, I don't know who's not been on a virtual platform in higher education over the last few months, but we always take a moment to say, the way that we're going to do this is, since we only have an hour, we just ask that folks use the chat rather than unmuting, because it's a great opportunity for us to kind of continue to move forward and you get the information. And what we found is that our chats have been really robust. It's been more about talking to each other and sharing ideas and thoughts and saying, oh, I never thought about that. And then asking our facilitator questions also too. So it's definitely there for you. So feel free to jump in. Abby's going to assist me in monitoring that so we can make sure that Daniel answers your questions and all that good stuff. So know that if you want to send something to us privately, you can do that, as you know, because we are using Zoom. So thank you. I'd like to begin with our land acknowledgement. Leadership would like to begin this presentation by acknowledging that the land each of us is on is the original homelands of indigenous and tribal nations. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal from these territories, and we honor and respect the many diverse indigenous peoples still connected to this land. Please honor and acknowledge the Native and indigenous peoples from the land that you're joining us from, and give thought to your ancestry and the generations that came before you. I'm joining you from Washington, D.C., actually, which is the ancestral homelands of many Native and indigenous peoples, but primarily the Piscataway. So I think that for those of you that know us, know that LeaderShape is about a just, caring, and thriving world where all lead with integrity and a healthy disregard for the impossible. And our mission is to transform the world by increasing the number of people who lead with integrity and a healthy disregard for the impossible. So excited to welcome Dr. Daniel Ostick, who has graciously agreed to join us from the University of Maryland. And I'm going to take a few moments. I want Daniel to introduce himself and say hello and anything he wants to share.
Thank you so much, Vernon. Hi, everybody. My name is Daniel Ostick. I work as Assistant Director for Student and Staff Development at the University of Maryland in the Department of Resident Life. I've been here on campus a long time, 18 years now. But I know Vernon from when he was one of my mentors and advisors when I was an undergraduate student at the University of Georgia many moons ago. For those of you who are just joining us, Vernon had mentioned this earlier, but sometimes you don't see it in the chat window. We encourage you to go ahead and put your name and your pronouns and your school in the chat window so we can see a little bit about who everyone's here. I know quite a number of people have joined us just in the past few minutes. I'm super excited to join you here today. We're going to dive into the materials in just a minute, but I think that covers my introductions, Vernon, if there's something else you wanted to do next.
That's awesome. All I'm going to say is go dogs.
Go dogs.
So if you've joined us before, we've always had some polling questions at the beginning. This series, this time around, we've decided to ask the presenters to give us polling questions. So a little bit of a shift. So this week, if you're joining us for multiple ones, you'll notice that the polling questions will be focused on the topic and really getting some information from you to assist the facilitator. So we'll start off, Abby's gonna help me out here. So we'll start off with the first polling question. Think of the students you work with to run your leadership programs. Are they, and we've got student employees, volunteers, combination of both. All right. All right, looks like we're hovering pretty high up there at a combination of both. Yeah, good number of student employees too, 16%, so 37%.
Which makes it an even more complicated and important question to think about.
Absolutely. All right, thank you so much for that. So, poll number 2. On a scale of 1 to 10, what level of autonomy should students you advise have? 1 being full autonomy and 10 being no autonomy.
I won't drive the poll. I wouldn't be surprised if we got a lot of 1s or a lot of 10s, because we know it's not that simple.
It's not that simple.
Oh, interesting though. Huh.
All right.
Can I just comment on this, Vernon, for
Sure.
a second? This is not the results that I would have expected. I think I would have expected numbers, a lot more people doing the, 6, 7, and 8s, and we got a lot of 3s and 4s and 5s here. So very cool. Excellent. Thank you.
Very cool. All right.
Fantastic.
All right. And our final polling question. On a scale of 1 to 10, what level of autonomy should students you supervise have? 1 being full autonomy and 10 being no autonomy.
I will say, doesn't seem terribly different from the first group of responses.
I was noticing that it's pretty similar.
But all over the place.
Yep, all over the place. But that's, I mean, it really shows the complexity of thinking about supervision and advising in that way. So thanks, everyone.
Or I think about being at a campus where I'm a 9 and my supervisor's a 2. Or particularly for students that I advise, I think I'm a 9. They should have lots and lots of autonomy, and my supervisor thinks they're a 2 in terms of not. Oh.
Well, thanks, everyone. As we begin, before I turn it over to Daniel, I just want to give some context about how this sort of came to be. Daniel and I were actually chatting, because we hang out all the time, and I actually was sharing a story about I've advised so many student organizations when I worked on a campus, and I remember I worked advising in Residence Hall Association, and I remember that one year my Residence Hall Association president disappeared for like a week, no communication whatsoever. And there was a lot going on in terms of us getting ready for going to a regional conference. And I just remember going, what did I do wrong? Because I felt that I'd had a great relationship with this student. And I really thought about the difference between me working with this student president and me working with staff that that are paid and that I supervise, and how different it was, and what could I do differently, and how could I have, and then Daniel said, oh, I got some thoughts on that. And so I said, well, this is a perfect opportunity for folks to really engage. And so I'm excited to have Daniel join us in this conversation and lead us. And so I'm just gonna give it to you, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Vernon. I don't know everyone who's on this list, and I don't know all the jobs you hold, but I do know that there is a lot of expertise in the room that is beyond the magical words of Daniel Ostick, that people have more experience than I do, have faced different dilemmas that I have, and have a lot to bring to the table. So I do want to encourage you, as we're thinking about these guiding questions, to Type your thoughts, type a question, type something you want us to explore in the chat box, and Vernon and I will do our best to have conversation and monitor what people are chatting about, and try to bring those voices forward for us. And I'm glad to see some faces of some people I know too, so welcome to everyone. These are going to be our guiding questions today, and we're going to work through these sort of piece by piece. But let me talk a little bit about Vernon and I's conversation about what topic to pick. Vernon and I had brainstormed some topics, and we came up with a really great topic, and then the next day neither of us had written it down, and we had no recollection of what the topic was, and so we re-brainstormed, and this might have been it, but this is a great topic for us to think about today. And it's a bit of a misnomer to call this the fine line between advising and supervising, because sometimes it's not a fine line. It's not like, oh, once I've figure this thing out, then I know that I should be doing this because I'm advising, and I should be doing this because I'm supervising. The truth is, it's muddy, and the line doesn't really exist. Or where I think the line is different where other people think the line is, and so it can be confusing when you are the advisor, or the supervisor, or coordinating leadership programs, or advising student organizations, trying to figure out who's responsible for what and when, and what do other people feel about that as well, who might be my own supervisor. So we're going to dig into this stuff, and I think we're going to have a great conversation. So the first guiding question we're going to explore, and you can see the whole list here, is what do you do when your view of your role as an advisor may not match with the expectations of others? And how can you reconcile this mismatch? I want to use an example here. At the University of Maryland, we have a very, very strong and active Residence Hall Association on campus. But we also have a full-time staff member whose big part of their job responsibilities is advising RHA. And the truth is, sometimes we hear from our assistant vice president of student affairs or a vice president for student affairs saying they have an expectation about what RHA should be doing or should not be doing. And we try to hear that and express that to our Residence Hall Association without making them feel like somebody higher up is telling you what to do as a student organization that we don't pay. And so I'm curious, sort of, how do you reconcile the mismatch between your expectations of what students might be doing when you're advising them and the expectations that others might have? So if you have any thoughts about that, put them in the chat window, we'll explore it. Vernon, you said you seem to have faced that as well?
Yeah, what I'm thinking about is a great mentor of mine shared that it's really important to see an advising relationship similar to a supervisory relationship in terms of the expectations you set up, the meetings that you constantly have. Do you talk about your role as an advisor when you're having one-on-ones with your RHA president or the leaders that you're advising? And so that's one thing that I took, is that, and to continue to have those, to not forget that it's a relationship that you have to build.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, some of the skills that you use as a supervisor, some of the skills you use as an advisor aren't completely different skills. It's just sometimes it's about the nuance of the conversation. And so as a supervisor, maybe there can be more about you setting expectations for the people that are doing the work. And an advisor, it's more about, I mean, and you're still going to have a conversation, obviously, with people you supervise about the expectations they have for you. But with an advisory relationship, it's really more about them understanding and having more of that conversation. And often they haven't been in that conversation, and about you guiding the way so that they understand what this back and forth is going to be.
Mm-hmm. Well, and
go ahead, Vernon.
Well, and I think about the example that I shared at the beginning. If an RA that I supervise disappeared for a week, there's consequences. You know, and this person I advised disappearing for a week, I don't believe that they felt that there were consequences. And so I think about, you know, what could I have shared at the beginning to say, you know, this relationship is one where you have a responsibility. And if you don't follow through with that responsibility, here's what I believe should happen. And yes, there are ways in which a governing board can have a conversation about a student disappearing, but how can I instill in them that, yeah, there's some accountability here.
Right, and you know, and when you're an advisor, while my goal as somebody I supervise would not be to fire them automatically, but you know, as an advisor, I don't even have the ability to remove them from the position. There is a constitution and bylaws that say how that needs to happen. And I, as an advisor, can't pull the lever on making that happen. It has to be another student who has to bring it forward and have a motion and have a conversation. And I have a lot less control over what that outcome is going to be.
Absolutely.
Somebody had written in the chat that this is very relatable. How do you manage those expectations? And it is a lot harder when you're a new professional. They talked about they're more savvy about doing that later on. You know, I was advising just a hall council when I was a brand new hall director way back when, and I made this mistake all the time about setting an expectation for my student groups and they were like, no, Daniel, we don't want to do that. You're not our boss. I mean, I don't think they said you're not our boss, but it was really the feel of like, you need to let us take control and let us drive the agenda forward here.
I'm really glad you brought up being a new professional, because that's a really good point. I remember early on in my career, I believe that students, they respected me, but not to the level that I think they respected me later on when I, for instance, advised student government at Iowa State University. I've been in the profession for a while, and I had some sort of authority is not the word. It's more of, I think I wasn't as close to their age. And I do believe that some of it was around me developing myself as a young professional and saying, here's my role, let's work together. But I do believe that I sometimes fell into the trap of, well, if they see me as a good friend, they're gonna follow through. Not something that I should have done initially in my career, because that's probably the reason why I had, you know, that situation happen, is because I was thinking about it as, you know, we're friends and you would never do this to a friend. But no, the line between friendship and advising too.
This, I'd made a comment on my Facebook a couple of weeks ago that I was doing this session and sort of wanted to get people's takes, like things that they would think are important to talk about. And this idea came up about when do you advise, when do you decide, when do you sell, when do you tell? Like at what point do you, because you know you have the authority that there are some things that you can do, or that you could, even when you're an advisor, use your influential power to make them do that maybe feels like it's less about them making the decision and more about you making the decision, and about where do you figure out where that line is? And at what points do you say, I'm gonna go this way or I'm gonna go that way? Are there topics or things that pop up that make people decide that they want to lean more into deciding or lean more into advising? People have thoughts on that? Feel free to drop them into the chat. Yeah, thank you, Matt. Matt was talking about through more experience, you sort of start to build up a reputation of knowing what you're talking about. Maybe students will listen to you, or just based on your positional, you have some positional power. That if I were advising an RHA, they might listen to me in a way, or even if I'm trying to help them, if I'm advising them to make good decisions, they may hear it as me telling them what to do, and I really have to figure out how do I phrase what it is that I'm saying in a way that they can hear it to make sure that they still feel empowered to make the decision themselves.
I remember too, one thing I did a little differently after I'd been advising for a while is really focus on transitions in terms of having, you know, the leadership that's leaving talk to the leadership that's entering about who is Vernon as an advisor, so they can talk, and then me be a part of that at some point, but really focusing on, you know, making sure that advising is part of the transition, because typically we talk more about very specific mechanical things around transitions in leadership, but we got to not forget about advising transitions too.
Maria asked me to repeat what I said about advising, deciding. I said, when do you advise? When do you decide? When do you sell? Or when do you tell? That's sort of some rhymes there about advising or supervising. I think about, like, imagine you have a summer leadership program and you have some summer interns who typically during the year are maybe your volunteer student leaders, but you're paying them a stipend at the end of the summer for the work that they're doing to run a summer leadership series. And at the beginning of the summer, you're doing a planning retreat. You're having conversations about expectations, about what you want to do for the summer. And your summer interns tell you that they want to do X, Y, or Z. And you feel like, well, that's not really what not really what I thought you signed up for. You know, you want students to be involved in the planning and the organization, but when do you say, you know, it's important that we stick to this, and I'm paying you for the summer, so it's a different kind of experience that I'm expecting you to have. I'm directing the traffic here, and maybe you're the traffic monitors. But looking at the chat, people talked about. Anne brought up the idea of it sometimes depends on what the kind of student organization maybe it is. You mentioned student government, where they can obligate the university, or there's differential impact on the university based on the decisions that they make. So, you know, when an SGA decides that they want to cancel student fees for athletics, I think that was just in the news today, at Oregon maybe. What does that mean in terms of the ripple impact on the rest of the university? And how can you as an advisor not tell them they need to do or not do something, but how can you make sure that they understand that there's power in the positions that they have, and that there may be impacts, and people that they've relied on for support may be less inclined to support them in the future.
And I'm sure some of you saw in the Chronicle today, this morning, Virginia Tech is dissolving their student government and reforming it because of issues around sexism and discrimination. And so I'm trying to read more about it to find out the background to that, but just go to the Chronicle of Higher Education and go to in brief. And so can you imagine advising that organization and know that to get to this point where now they're dissolving it and developing a new undergraduate governance structure? That's a case study that's those of us that have advised student government or currently do that. I don't want to scare you, but I did want to make sure you know that that's in the Chronicle today, this morning.
Exciting and scary, both. Definitely is worth a case study. A lot of other people are talking about this idea of the kind of student organization you advise may, or even the kind of group, the kind of office you work in terms of the kind of things that your student employees are working on. What it is that they're thinking about may impact the kind of help you give them in advising or deciding. You know, if you work with something that is community-based or has a diversity, equity, or inclusion lens, you really want, particularly if you're not a member of the community, of the group that you're advising, you really want to think about who's making the decisions here, whose voices are being heard, who's driving the agenda, who's not driving the agenda, what voices are or are not in the room. Whereas a group that is putting on sort of leadership programs at large, it's obviously still something we want to think about, but it's a different kind of approach.
I am glad Anne mentioned the difference in organizations, because it's really important for us to know that, you know, when I advise the National Residence Hall honorary, that's different from when I advise student government, you know, at a large PWI with a, you know, $1.2 million budget. I mean, there are dynamics that happen that are really important to kind of think about as we continue to advise different types of organizations.
Well, that leads us to this third question here about the carrots and the sticks. If people don't understand that analogy, it's a horse-related analogy. I don't know. I use a lot of these random analogies. So when you want to get a horse to go, you usually use a carrot. So here you have this carrot. This is a treat. Or you use a stick to sort of hit the horse. I don't recommend this to get the horse to go. But supervisors and advisors can use similar or different carrots and sticks to get their group to do what they need them to do. Often the thing that comes up is related to expenditures. If you advise a student organization and you have to sign off on their ability to spend money, then all of a sudden you have this amount of power to drive the agenda in a way that you want, or at least that they need to at least bring you along. But even some people say, well, no, my job, I may have to sign off, but my job is to just write a blank check every time they want money. I just sign off on it because I believe that the students should have the autonomy to spend the money they want, even if you have to sign off. And other people may believe that, no, I really need to be a steward of these finances, and make sure that they're spending these finances. And if I think they're spending these finances in an unwise way, then I need to step in and keep them from doing it, rather than just advising them that they maybe shouldn't or should think of it.
And Daniel, so I'm thinking about the making sure that we understand and research the history of the organization, not only in terms of legacy and connection to the institution, but also to the history of advising. Who's advised that organization before you, and what can you find out about it? Because there are some organizations, I think about, organizations that are connected to traditions like homecoming or something that really is entrenched in the institution. That's different because there's a lot of history and there's a lot of nuance to how do you kind of come in, especially if it's something that's very established. And sometimes there are roadways that people, these positions are looked at as being like the pivotal position to be at a campus, most coveted. And so how do we advise these organizations that really and truly sometimes don't see us as advisors because they can do what they want to do, or they feel that they can?
Well, Vernon, you faced that when you were assistant dean of students at Iowa State University. They had a huge tradition. Was it called Visha? What's the name of it?
Yep, that's what it was called.
And a huge student tradition from year to year to year. And it had a lot of students having strong opinions about what should and should not happen. And you're stepping in as an advisor who says, maybe that's an unwise way of going about that, and really having to push back in nuanced ways. So what other carrots and sticks? Are there other things that sort of drive why you may decide to push towards sort of telling as opposed to selling with a student organization that you may be advising? I'd mentioned finances as certainly being one way. Certainly risk management is another thing that comes up. Not only in terms of reputational risk, but also actual physical risks, things that student organizations should or should not do, or universities and policies that universities have related to risk management, students signing off on things, how you do different kind of setups, the ways in which you're allowed to spend money that create different risks for different populations. So.
Well, I also think about, as we move, into 2021, 2022, as we continue to see racial unrest, as we continue to see oppression just manifested in so many different ways on college campuses, student organizations are going to make some statements. They're going to want to be a part of the conversation. And so, how do we navigate? I know sometimes I want to be of support, and I know that I have some knowledge of how to maybe strategically engage these conversations, but it may not be viewed that way by student activists who say, Vernon's part of the administration who's trying to tell us not to do something. And on the one hand, I don't want to be seen in that way. I want to be of support, but I also have some knowledge around ways in which we can navigate political climate. So how do I show up in a way that I can still have agency with them, but at the same time, I don't want to hold them back, because I kind of want them to blow shit up sometimes, but I got to kind of, how do I balance that?
Well, when you're sitting in the room and, the student group, the executive board of your student organization is having a conversation about what they want to do, and you, because you've been there a while, are running a script through your head about how that's going to be perceived by other people on campus, or you're thinking, who's going to call me tomorrow and say, what's going on with your student organization? Like you had something to do with the decision, or they're going to be upset, or that they're not going to like what the student organization is doing. And that just by saying that, they're going to think that what you're saying is, I don't think you should do this, students. And you have to find a way to say, look, let me talk to you a little about how this may be perceived, just to give you a heads up and really force that, like, you're not trying to tell them what they can and cannot do. Except sometimes you decide you must tell them what they can and cannot do.
Well, and based on the student organization, the pressure that you can get, when I advised student government, I knew if I got a call from the president the day after a student government meeting, because we always had our student government meetings on Monday night or Tuesday night. If there was a note that said, call the president on Wednesday morning, I'm like, shit, oh, well, knew what that was about. But then, how do you navigate that? That in my role, I'm advising. And so how can I navigate between the president, who's got some thoughts about a trustee that just got an email, and then, absolutely.
And this is why there's no fine line, because it depends on who's making the call, and what the topic is. And depends on who's got which kind of feelings about it. And so it's not an easy thing to navigate. And I think it's even harder to navigate when you're supervising a group of students, because if a group of students that you're supervising does something that creates, I don't want to say create drama, but that people higher up in the administration have some strong feelings about negatively, then you really are more on the hot seat, because you can't lean on well, I advise these students and I try to give them good advice, but ultimately it's the decisions that they're making here, and it's their voice that's being put forward. When you're a supervisor, they're going to say, no, this is you. You're responsible for the students you supervise, and you're going to be held responsible when they do X, Y, or Z, when they don't follow a policy, when they act up, okay, as what a higher up may consider it being. See some of the comments here. That's good. Someone said, as an advisor, to help formulate his questions, instead of saying, I'm making a declarative statement about what you should do, say, have you thought about, have you considered, do you think this might be an issue? If you were asked this question from our VP of Student Affairs, how might you respond to that? Because the next day they're going to get that question from the VP of Student Affairs, because you heard it last year when the same thing came up. And so really sort of raising it as conversation starters as opposed to conversation stoppers. The next question in the guiding questions is about modeling leadership best practices that we are imparting to others. That, we are running leadership programs, a lot of us, and we're helping students understand principles related to collaboration, related to consensus, related to having people's voices be heard. And are there particular leadership practices that you use when you're advising versus when you are supervising? So it's a more headier question for us to consider. One that comes, I always think about the social change model, of course. It's one that I am naturally drawn to. And I think about controversy with civility, like how, particularly in a group student organization where different people in the student organization have different ideas about what the outcome should be or what they want to do. And you can't be the tiebreaker. You're the advisor, not the supervisor. You can't be the tiebreaker and just say, well, I think we should do this, therefore we're going to do this, when there's a difference of opinions, sometimes strong difference of opinions. And really, how can you set the stage for making sure that they're having constructive conversations when they're having critical differences? Sometimes when those critical differences are really based in strong opinions about the ways in which the student organization should work. It's not just a logistics question. Sometimes it's a question of, who are we? What are we about? What stamp do we want to leave on this organization? And what are our own personal values? And where do those come from? And so, those create strong feelings in student organizations.
I know that I'm really using the liberation pedagogy that's being talked about in social justice education to help students to see visioning and future rather than being in struggle all the time. Because I think that most of our students don't have a model for what to do other than to be in struggle through their marginalized identities. And so there's some great new work out there. Cameron Beatty, just Google Cameron Beatty, Florida State University. He's one of the folks who there's a new book coming out that really is going to talk about how we can use that as leadership educators to help reframe how we can work with our student leaders to really think about what visioning and future looks like. So what does it look like? It's more than just doing a sit-in. It's about thinking about what that sit-in will produce. And do you know what that looks like after the sit-in? Because most folks are just in the struggle, and which isn't a bad thing, but we need to help people to kind of be in the visioning place also.
Forelli on here mentioned Stanford's challenge and support, a good old classic chestnut of the work in student affairs, challenge and support. And absolutely, it helps us remember that there's always an and here. It's not either or, it's gonna be both and we have to think about, in particular situations, with the particular student that I happen to be working with on that day, that there may be a student who doesn't have a lot of information, or is new to the position, or doesn't understand the dynamics that are happening in the room or on campus, or they have a forceful opinion about something, but they have no understanding of how their opinion is going to be heard by others. And how do you find a way to meet that student where they're at in the space that you're in, and in the context that you're in? And it's not, you know, some of you on the poll questions had said, you know, when you picked not a lot of people picked 1 or 10, but there were some 9s and some 2s. And so when you're a 9 or a 2 related to, you feel like students should have, you know, tons of autonomy, or you really feel like students should not have a lot of autonomy, that can be really hard, because it's harder to find the 4s, 5s, and 6s. Man, I'm not judging those 9s and 2s out there, because there might be real situations where it's important to be a 9 or a 2 based on the kind of group that you're working with. But sometimes the people in the middle there, they say it's so much of your answer. You probably saw that poll question and you said, well, it depends. It depends on the group, the student, the campus, the expectations of other people. And so I'm going to go for the middle, because on one day I am a 3 and on another day I'm a 7, depending on what it is that's happening.
Well, and the culture of leadership on the campus is really important too. I mean, you know, there are different types of institutions, or, you know, and I don't want to stereotype and say, like, for instance, HBCUs may be one thing, but I do believe that the culture of the campus and the leadership is something to take in consideration, especially around advising and supervising. So that is very important.
Adrian shared with us. Thank you, Adrian. Hi, it's nice to have you here. Cameron is doing a webinar tomorrow about addressing white fragility and anti-racism teaching in leadership education. So directly on point. Thank you. Adrian is a former University of Maryland person, so it's good to see her on here. This last question is about pitfalls that you have encountered and learned from. This idea of, we don't get it right all the time. Sometimes we make a misstep. Just because we're the professional getting paid the salary doesn't mean we get it right all the time. Sometimes we do things incorrectly, or we make a misstep, we tell the student the wrong thing, or there's implications that we hadn't anticipated. If anybody would like to share in the chat window some pitfalls you've encountered and learned from. I think a pitfall that I've encountered and learned from is it sort of alludes to what Vernon mentioned earlier, is when I get that phone call the next day saying, what's going on with RHA? And I'm like, oh, like, what do you mean? And somebody's feeling very strongly about something that happened at the Senate meeting the next day, because on our campus, the Diamondback student newspaper comes to every RHA meeting. And if there's something of interest, it'll be a front page on the student newspaper the next day. And so our VP of student affairs will read the student newspaper, or they'll hear about it. And so for me, it was what I learned was, I need to recognize those things, even if I don't think it's a big deal, that somebody else might think it's a big deal. And so that night after the meeting, I need to, you know, send that email. I need to alert somebody. I need to give them a heads up. And especially if I'm the advisor and I know what the agenda of the meeting is, I need to give people a heads up saying, hey, I just want to let you know that tonight RHA is going to have a conversation about student fees. And the word on the street is that they're really going to push for us not to approve this resolution that's been approved every year for 10 years related to student fee use. And so I wanted to give you a little bit of a heads up. The people who are coming need to be ready to answer questions, and it may be in the paper tomorrow. You know, that is super, super helpful. And even whether I'm advising or supervising, I think that's something that people want to know about. People don't like to be surprised. I can't control that 100%, but I can control it when I can control it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark saying sometimes he doesn't think it's a big deal, and then it is.
Those are my favorites, when you're like, what? This is a big deal? Oh, okay. Oh, didn't see that coming. All right.
Nick sort of alluded to this idea, but it's also about managing up or supervising up. How can I help my supervisor or people higher up understand what that student organization is all about? Because maybe they came from a school where the student government or a particular kind of student organization had a certain way of being, where they really looped in and involved them. And on this particular campus, that's not what happens. They are much more sort of activism focused. They see themselves as their own, the controllers of their own destiny, and they see administration as somebody that they've got to fight against. They're not going to be the ones who sort of want to involve and bring along other people in the organization.
Yeah, I remember one time I got some feedback from a supervisor that was interesting. my supervisor said, Vernon, I just want to let you know that you seem very possessive of the organizations that you advise. And I went,
You're like, is that a bad thing?
I was like, and talk more. And it was a wonderful conversation. But what was interesting was that I would say I am, but I didn't realize that he was speaking from other professionals who watched me advise. It wasn't from him, it was from my colleagues who said that if anything would happen, Vernon was always there to say, could you make sure you talk to me about this organization because I'm the advisor? And I'm thinking, well, that's what I do. And so it was a really good conversation because I didn't know the perception that was out there was that don't step on Vernon's toes when it comes to the student organizations. Because I didn't want that to be a part of my leadership style or my advising style with other colleagues. I definitely wanted to be in a collaborative mode, but obviously that was not what I was putting out there. So it made me really rethink, how I work with my other colleagues who are also advising other student organizations.
Travis made a good comment in the chat about sometimes as an advisor, we want to sit back and let the group do what the group wants to do. It's certainly easier. it's less actively engaged. The student can do what they want. And they can learn from their mistake. Sometimes people will say that, students can learn from their mistakes, but when you need to step in and help them not make those mistakes in the first time, if they just could have had a little bit more information. But there are advisors who really lean back and say, the student group is the student group's responsibility. They can decide what they want to do, and they will have to be accountable for what happens. And that's a dangerous place to be if you want that student group to succeed. I think that you need to find a greater balance between sitting back and really stepping in and letting them learn from the wisdom of your experience. Brennan, let's go ahead and go to the, or Abby, let's go ahead and go to the next slide because some of these things, one too far, here we go. Because this is what's coming up and I see the conversation. I've seen this pop up in the conversation in the chat window several different times, and people are sort of saying they appreciate when people are sharing this idea that really, above anything else, that the key here is about communication, that direct conversations with students about how they see their role, how the students see their role, how you see your role, and talk about what are the conflicts. If you've advised a student organization for 5 years, you have lots of context about what works and what does not work. But for some of these students, this is their first time in the room, ever even thinking about these topics. And so it doesn't mean you come in and say, here are all my expectations, here's all the things we learned, here's how I think you should do it because I know better because I've been here 5 years. But really to say, when you took on this role, student, what did you hope this experience was going to be like? How can I be supportive? And then really talking to other people who have a vested interest in the work, your supervisor, other student organizations, about the expectations and roles that they have with the work that happens. I'd say one thing to think about is non-negotiables. The last thing you want is to be an advisor of a student organization and really give them this idea that they are really in control of their destiny, and then all of a sudden step in and say, oh yeah, but no, I'm not going to approve that. Or, oh no, that's not okay. Then they feel like they are blindsided by you in terms of what it is that they can and cannot do. So really let them know that, my goal as your advisor is to help you succeed. I want you to have ownership for the decisions you make, and I want you to be empowered to make a difference as student leaders. But there are a few things that the university is going to make sure, through virtue of my position, that I pay extra special attention to. And some of those things include financial misuse. Even if you want to, there's some things I can't let you spend money on. So let me talk to you about what those are, and here's the policy. Issues of discrimination, that you're not going to sit back if you see them treating other people poorly, or you see them creating systems that have differential impact on the particular populations on our campus. Sort of authoritative behavior. If you see a president stepping up and trying to be the decider, I'm the president, I get to decide because I am the president of this organization, that's harmful, and you'll step in. And obviously safety and risk issues. You don't want people physically hurt as well. Would this match? These are the things that I came up with and I was thinking about. Are there other things where you feel like there are non-negotiables, where you feel like, oh no, I really can't let the autonomy lie with students when it comes to certain topics? Feel free free to chat them in the window. Are there other ones that you've faced? These felt like the most relevant for most student organizations. There might be other ones where you feel like, oh no, I always step in when such and such happens. Talking to the media. Oh, that's a really good one. That's not one that we necessarily have with a lot of our student organizations, but there is. But that doesn't mean at the beginning of the year you don't have a conversation with your students about what it means to talk to student organizations, or that when the student newspaper is going to be at all your meetings, that you need to know that you're not saying it to the group, you are saying it to the public, and they will quote you specifically. And so know what that means. Signing legal documents as contracts without prior approval, certainly you can't have, well, some schools they can do this, but some schools might be the case where you say, look, I have to be the one who signs an official document. That was a really good one, the other one about the talk to the media. I hadn't considered that one. So Abby, let's go to the next slide here. And then the final word I want to say is that the best traits for supervision and advising are the same. They may show up different in different contexts. They may be nuanced differences, but really in the end, a lot of them are about relationship building, about trust and confidence in each other, about problem solving and critical thinking, about empathy, about identifying talent and helping students grow and develop through the experiences that they have. I'd say those are things that you want to have happen when you supervise students who do leadership programs. And those are things that you want to have happen when you're advising students and who run leadership programs. You know, certainly the idea of autonomy is one that is a little bit more wishy-washy, which is why we were talking about it today. But the way in which you figure all these things out are through these particular skills that are the same for advising and supervising. Somebody wrote, oh, Adrian, interference with university investigations. Put a couple more words about that, Adrian. I'm trying to wrap my mind around exactly what that may look like. Yeah, I agree. It sounds like there's a story there. So Adrian, you don't have to, it doesn't necessarily have to be the school that you're at that you're thinking about. This could be a broader example if you don't want to call it out as an Ohio State thing. But this is, because this is probably true at a lot of schools. The university is doing a investigation into the way they treat athletics or the way they treat athletes, and the SGA wants to pass a resolution related to it, or yeah, I'm forcing Adrian to type something maybe. Sorry, Adrian. Oh. Yeah. Oh, when your student organization gets embroiled in some kind of investigation on campus that's related to student misconduct of some kind. And there's lots of kinds of student misconduct on schools. And so it could be hazing, sexual misconduct, it could be cheating scandals, you know, it could be lots and lots of different kinds of things. But when leadership wants to get involved, thank you. Now, she's like, not at Ohio State, don't call my school out, Daniel, somewhere else. So I appreciate that. Any final thoughts that people have related to this topic that they feel like we haven't touched on, or something that you wanted to make sure that you got my thoughts or Vernon's thoughts about?
As folks are typing in some final comments, I'll share one of my missteps as an advisor. I advised a student programming board that was in charge of bringing in concerts, and they had a tradition of bringing in only live acts. And then we got a request from an agent to bring in these 3 women who were traveling, but they were a track act. In other words, they sung to a track. They didn't have a band. It was not, and so they asked me, they said, Vernon, we would really be moving against tradition if we went and if we selected this group. And they said, well, Vernon, what do you think? And I said, well, let's do the pros and cons. And we talked about it. And so the group decided they wanted to continue to do live music because they said, you know, they thought that ticket sales would be down if folks realized that it would be an act that sung to a track, and it wasn't a live act. Looking back, that group was Destiny's Child. So just so you know,
I was going to guess that.
we yeah, my students passed on Destiny's Child. So I could have met Beyonce. So, I'm still bitter about my misstep in advising. I should have been more forceful and said, we need to bring this track act in. But you live and learn.
But this was back when Pharaoh was in Destiny's Child.
Oh, way back. We're talking way back.
Back in the early days. I appreciate people bringing up this idea of, you could tell students, listen, I'm paid to have an opinion here, so I'm going to give you my opinion. You don't have to take my opinion, but I'm going to share with you what my opinion is. Or when you give students advice, or you say that they want to drive and you let them sort of take the lead, and then it falls apart, and then they say, well, why did you let this fall apart? You knew better as our advisor. And so you have to really look for those kinds of pitfalls when you're advising and thinking about, look, I'm going to let you take the lead here. I'm concerned that this is going to happen, and I need you to be thinking about what maybe the consequences will be if that happens. And I think this is a big risk, student, but if you're willing to take this risk because you think, you gotta swing for the stars, then I think that's something you can know going in. But I'm paid to have an opinion, and I'm gonna share with you my opinion. Brendan, I think you had some wrap-up things you needed to talk about, or you or Abby?
Sure.
To LeaderShape. I wanted to start off by thanking everybody for coming today. There's lots of other great programs that you can attend. I'm glad you came to this one, and there's a lot more coming up, which Vernon or Abby are going to talk about.
Daniel, thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. What a great conversation. Just let folks know, this presentation is recorded, so we will be sharing the recording with you, and feel free to share it with other colleagues who couldn't join us, because we really want to get the word out. It wouldn't be a LeaderShape experience if we didn't end with a little commercial. Please know that we have moved several of our programs to virtual platforms, including our new engaging program for professionals and students, Courageous Dialogue. So if you need any information about these programs, just send us a quick email, and we will send you our virtual platforms. We are excited that the response to these have been amazing, and we thank our facilitators who've assisted us in sort of recrafting some of our curriculum. So very excited. And once again, we do have another conversation tomorrow. Tomorrow, we'll be engaging a conversation on who in the generation are you? An engaging talk on the impact of multi-generational society in higher education. So that's tomorrow, same time, same channel. Excited. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you once again, Daniel, for joining us and sharing such a great conversation. Thank you, thank you. I've got to step off because I've got another call, of course, at 2. But if folks want to hang for a bit and chat with Daniel, I don't know how long you have, Daniel, but
a few minutes, sure.
Cool. All right, thanks everybody.
Just restop recording too, Abby.
Yeah, I will do that right now. Awesome.